The film begins with Thug parking near the house he's renting. He recalls a childhood memory when, at 9 years old, he fought a boy at school. Encouraged by his father not to be a coward, Thug beat the boy badly. His father later remarked he might not be a coward after all. Thug accompanies Kyle Connor, the son of mob boss Charlie Connor, to a fishery to negotiate a deal. The supplier agrees but grows defensive when Kyle probes about the product. After a tense exchange, the supplier mocks Thug's age, and his associate looks ready to fight. Thug calmly warns the man to control his associate before he breaks both his shoulders. The supplier smiles, and the deal is sealed. As they leave, Kyle scolds Thug for speaking up and making threats, but Thug sees Kyle is inexperienced and in over his head. Thug tells Kyle that if he wants to be a boss someday, he needs to act like one. During the drive, Thug tries to smoke, but Kyle objects. When Kyle snorts cocaine, Thug warns him that his habit will only lead to trouble. Thug visits a mattress store, the front for Charlie Connor's criminal operation. Charlie asks about the deal, and Thug tries to cover for Kyle, saying the price was decent. Charlie, however, sees through the lie and acknowledges Kyle's incompetence. He explains that he wanted Kyle to be a lawyer and have a respectable career, but Kyle insisted on joining the family business, despite lacking the skills. Charlie assigns Thug a new task, but Thug struggles to recall key details. When Charlie asks if he's okay, Thug lies, blaming severe headaches. Outside in his car, Thug writes notes in a notepad to help his memory, including one that reminds him Charlie Connor is his boss. Thug visits a local gym and spars with a new boxer. He lands some solid punches but takes a few himself. Later, in the locker room, he seems distracted. The gym owner checks on him and reminds him why he's there, to collect protection money. Thug takes the money and leaves. At his favorite bar, Thug argues with the bartender over free drinks. He hears a loud argument between a woman and her boyfriend and intervenes, telling the man to take it outside. When the man refuses and threatens him, Thug knocks him out with one punch. The woman screams, accusing Thug of killing her boyfriend. As Thug leaves the bar, the woman yells at him for knocking out her boyfriend. Thug says the guy deserved it. She smirks and asks who will take her home now. Thug goes back to her place, and they start making out passionately. She gently tells him to slow down, and they have sex. Later in bed, she talks about how she prefers the noise of her apartment to silence. She notices a tattoo on his arm that says Loopy and mentions it was her nickname in high school. When she asked about it, Thug coldly says it was for some whore. She calls that rude, but Thug explains it was for a woman he thought he loved, until he came back with the tattoo and found her with 2 of his friends. The woman says it was still a romantic gesture. The next morning, Thug leaves her apartment. At home, he works out before getting a call from Charlie, who instructs him to pick up a pill shipment from Dr. Gruber. When Charlie asks if he knows where to go, Thug says yes, but immediately checks his notebook. At the office, Dr. Gruber tries to haggle over the price of the pills, but Thug quickly shuts him down. Before leaving, Thug asks about his memory issues. Dr. Gruber advises him to see a specialist immediately. Thug visits a doctor and learns he has CTE, a degenerative brain condition. She explains he may only have a few years before he can no longer care for himself and asks if he has children. When Thug says yes, she tells him he will eventually need full-time care. At home, Thug sits in his car, struggling with his diagnosis. He pulls out a gun, ready to end his life, but stops when he sees a young girl outside. She gives him the middle finger and smiles, snapping him out of it. This moment inspires him to try to make amends. Inside, Thug calls his daughter Daisy. She is upset to hear from him, wants nothing to do with him, and refuses to meet. When Thug asks about his son, but can't recall his name, Daisy bitterly reminds him it's Colin. She then tells him Colin died 2 years ago. Shocked, Thug asks why no one told him. Daisy coldly replies that if he couldn't remember his name, why would it matter? Thug, devastated, asks where Colin is buried. Frustrated with himself, Thug smacks his head. The next morning, he visits the cemetery and, after searching, finds his son's gravestone. Angrily, he clears the grass and dirt off it. After a moment of reflection, he storms off, yelling at a caretaker that he should take better care of this place. Thug then goes to his daughter Daisy's house and notices a for sale sign on the door. Going around back, he finds her outside. Daisy is annoyed to see him, but Thug says he just wants to reconnect and maybe take her to dinner. He discovers he has a granddaughter, Katie, and a grandson, Dre. When he asks why she's selling the house, Daisy laughs bitterly, explaining she was renting and the owners are selling it out from under her. Thug attempts to explain his past actions, but Daisy cuts him off, criticizing him for his behavior and comparing him to the fathers of her children. When Thug asks again to take them to dinner, Daisy firmly tells him it's better if he leaves. That night, Thug dreams his house floods like the sea. He wakes to find himself on his bed, floating like a boat. He sees an image of his father and is shocked. Thug hears music, and his father points out a special engine playing guitar-like tunes. The next day, Thug meets Woman, who playfully jokes about him being a gangster. They spend the day together in bed. Thug notices scars around her tattoos, and she explains they are from cigarette burns and difficult past relationships. She points out his scars, and Thug replies that they are also from unpleasant experiences. Thug gets a call from Charlie and starts dressing, saying he has to go to NYC. When Woman asks for a goodbye kiss, Thug says he doesn't have time and leaves. Thug and Kyle drive to NYC. Kyle asks for directions, knowing Thug has been there many times, but Thug deflects, telling him to use the GPS. When they arrive, Thug instructs Kyle to loop around the building to check for anything suspicious. Once satisfied, Thug completes the exchange for a large moving truck, which they drive away in. On the highway, Kyle asks what they're transporting, but Thug shuts him down. Suddenly, a police car gets behind them, and Kyle panics. Thug shoves him to the floor, ensuring the cop only sees him and not a panicking Kyle, which could draw attention. After the police car passes, Kyle gets back in his seat and tells Thug he'll talk to his dad about being disrespected. Thug replies that respect isn't given, it's earned. Kyle does a bump of cocaine, and Thug warns him it'll only make him more paranoid. Thug and Kyle deliver the truck to a suburban home owned by Gamberro, who directs them to park in the back. When Kyle tries to get out, Thug stops him, saying they're not supposed to know what's inside. But fate intervenes when Thug hears a woman screaming. One of them, Araceli, reaches up to his window, begging for help. Before he can react, two of Gamberro's men drag her away. Thug notices his hand bleeding from being accidentally cut by her, and is horrified, realizing he's helped traffic women into the sex trade. Guilt consumes him. The next day, Thug visits Daisy at Dre's school, where they watch Dre make an interception that leads to a touchdown. After the game, Thug gives Dre a fishing reel as a gift. Dre wants to stay for another game, and Daisy agrees, needing to pick up her daughter. After the second game, Thug reminds Dre of his promise to Daisy to get him home. In the car, Thug asks Dre why he was kicked off the team for hitting the coach's son. Dre explains the kid wouldn't stop provoking him. Thug advises that sometimes it's better to walk away. When Dre asks if that's why Thug went to prison, Thug admits it was, because he couldn't walk away. Dre also mentions his mother said Thug abandoned them. Thug stays silent, confirming it. Thug takes Dre to a gym, where they watch two boxers spar. Later, they pad up, and Thug teaches Dre some basic moves. Afterward, Thug drives him home, asking him not to tell his mom about the boxing. That night, Thug dreams of his father again. He wakes to find the wound from Araceli reopened and bleeding. While tending to it, Thug reflects on how his dad used to take him fishing every Sunday, but never let him use the boat alone. One week, when his dad was arrested and couldn't make bail, Thug took the boat out, thinking his dad would never find out, but he did. After that, they never went fishing again. Taking his bleeding hand as a sign to act, Thug returns to Gamberro's house and requests to see Araceli. When she begins to disrobe, he stops her. Thug asks if she has family in the US and offers to call them, but Araceli says they already know. She explains she must work off a $20,000 debt to be free and shows him a picture of her child. Disturbed but unable to help, Thug leaves, leaving her distraught. Later, Charlie calls and orders Thug to collect $20,000 from a priest. When Thug finds the priest, the man panics and tries to hide, but eventually hands over the money, apologizing for his fear. Thug asks if the priest does confessions, but before he can respond, the priest is shot in the head. Realizing the gunmen are after him, Thug takes out 2 of them before being cornered by a third with a shotgun. He escapes to his car, uses it to reverse and run the man over, and then interrogates him. Thug threatens the man's loved ones, forcing him to reveal that a big guy with a spider web tattoo on his neck sent them to kill Thug. Thug drives off, leaving the man to die. Thug goes to Charlie's house and hands over the money. When Charlie asks who the attackers were and if Thug has enemies, Thug replies he has too many to count, but none who would go this far, dismissing them as amateurs. At home, Thug finds woman nearby, and after some convincing, lets her into his sparsely furnished rental. She notices his CTE paperwork, and after some hesitation, Thug admits he's sick. When asked if she noticed his memory lapses, woman says she thought he was just an alcoholic, which Thug agrees is also true. He opens up about his son Colin, who died of a heroin overdose 2 years ago, and confesses he may not have supported him enough when he came out as gay. Thug tells woman their relationship won't end well due to his condition. Using the metaphor of gasoline meeting a flame, woman says she knows but wants to enjoy the time they have. The next morning, Thug tells woman he's meeting Daisy and his grandchildren for dinner and invites her to join him. When the day arrives, Thug dresses up and waits at the restaurant, but Daisy never shows. Devastated, Thug has a meltdown, and woman comforts him before taking him home. The next morning, while Thug sleeps, woman meets with Daisy and tells her the truth about his condition. Thug overhears, becomes enraged, and threatens woman in front of Daisy and Dre. Shocked, woman and Dre leave. She admits she stood him up because he abandoned them for most of their lives. However, after learning his condition is untreatable, Daisy offers to help him find a new doctor if he wants her help. Overwhelmed with guilt and anger, Thug has a panic attack, slapping his head and calling himself an idiot. He punches the walls until his hands bleed, consumed by shame. The next morning, Daisy and Dre are packing up the house when Thug arrives. He asks to speak to Dre. Struggling with his words, Thug apologizes for his behavior and tells Dre not to emulate him. Dre listens silently and then walks away down the hallway. That night, Thug goes to Charlie's office, planning to ask for a $40,000 loan, $20,000 to free Araceli, and $20,000 for his daughter's house down payment. Struggling with his worsening memory, he practices his speech on the way there. Upon arriving, he notices a new enforcer with a spider web tattoo on his neck. At Charlie's desk, Thug is asked to sit. Charlie mentions speaking with Dr. Gruber and learning about Thug's health issues. When Thug tries to downplay it, Charlie fires him, implying no severance. Thug protests, pointing out he handled the assassins, but Charlie challenges him to recall his phone number or address, which Thug can't. Kyle mocks him, asking if he needs help finding the door. As Thug turns to leave, he notices the enforcer's spider web tattoo, the same description given by the assassin. Realizing the connection, Thug knocks the enforcer out and draws his gun. He confronts Kyle and Charlie, furious they tried to have him killed. When Charlie's silence confirms he knew about Thug's condition long before speaking to Dr. Gruber, Thug demands he open the safe. Charlie refuses until Thug shoots Kyle in the leg, forcing compliance. Charlie opens the safe and Thug orders him to fill a bag with cash and guns. Disappointed rather than angry, Thug tells Charlie he came that night to ask for a favor after 30 years of loyalty, only to be discarded like a piece of shit. Thug holds a gun to Charlie's head. Accepting his fate, Charlie begs Thug not to kill Kyle. Thug shoots Charlie once in the chest, killing him and leaves, sparing Kyle as a final act of mercy for his old boss. Thug calls his lawyer, Bert, for an emergency meeting. After paying him in cash, he instructs Bert to send a cashier's check to his daughter to cover a house down payment. When Bert asks where the money came from, Thug shows him Charlie's name written on his hand. Bert nods grimly, realizing Thug's time is running out. Thug goes to woman's apartment and finds her drunk in the bathroom, with fresh cigarette burns she inflicted on herself. He tends to her wounds and holds her. Thug urges her to seek real help, but woman insists, offering $30,000 with her as she falls asleep. Later, Thug returns to Gamberro's house to buy Araceli's freedom. Gamberro laughs at the idea of selling one of his girls and mocks Thug's attempt at redemption. When Thug presses, Gamberro reveals Araceli was murdered by a customer earlier that day. Gamberro speaks casually about her death and human suffering, injuring Thug. Overcome with guilt for not saving her and enraged by Gamberro's indifference, Thug pulls a gun and orders him to move. Thug forces Gamberro to dismiss one of his enforcers and bring all the girls into the kitchen. Using his money and Gamberro's, he forces him to pay and release all the victims. As Gamberro complies, one of his men sneaks up with a gun, but a girl screams, alerting Thug, who shoots him dead. However, Gamberro stabs Thug multiple times with a hidden knife, leaving him on the floor. As Gamberro gloats, the last girl grabs the dropped gun and shoots him in the head. Panicked, she tries to help Thug, but he tells her to take the money and leave. Bleeding heavily, Thug calls Dre, telling him to wait outside without waking Daisy. When Thug arrives, he sees Dre and tells him he'll hear bad things about him soon. Dre notices Thug is injured, but Thug brushes it off, saying he's fine. Thug says maybe the only way to do something right is to do something bad. Dre doesn't understand, but Thug assures him he will, one day. As Dre comes closer, Thug briefly holds his hand, staining it with his blood. Thug whispers, "I tried," before telling Dre to go back inside. Dre silently obeys, knowing this is likely their last meeting. Thug drives back, but instead of going home, he breaks into an abandoned house nearby, drawn by its wind chime that sounds like a guitar. As the sun rises and the chime sways in the wind, Thug breathes heavily, bleeding out. The final shot is of the ocean, implying Thug succumbs to his wounds. If you enjoyed this video, don't be shy to hit the like button, and if you disliked it, hit the dislike button twice, just to be sure. It would be best if you watched the whole movie. Thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe for more videos like this.